may seem to be a strange comment from a noted jurist, Antonin Scalia commented at an event in Houston that capitalism needs Christianity, and that it is more reliant on Christianity than, say, socialism is. To quote Scalia, "For in order for capitalism to work, in order for it to produce a good and stable society, the traditional Christian virtues are essential." He also railed that Christian virtue is neutered, or Christian charity is neutered, by government-based handouts, and that the clause in the Bill of Rights that guarantees a separation of church and state, and that, the not established, what's called the Establishment Clause, that you can't establish a church, has been interpreted too broadly, and that the country is worse off for it. So there's a lot to unpack there. Where would you like to start?
Well, number one, the state can't establish a church.
Okay.
You all can establish churches, and hopefully you will at some point. But let's start at the very beginning.
It's a very good place to start.
Yes, that's what I hear.
When you read, you begin with ABC. When you sing, you begin with do, re, mi.
But what about when you're talking about jurists and prudence?
Anyway.
Let's start with thinking, okay, well, I can see, if I take it the way I want to take it, I can see where he gets that argument. Honesty.
Sure.
We would say that's a Christian value, right?
Yeah.
Capitalism won't work without honesty. Let's look at Enron and MCI and Tyco and how do you remember those companies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to do business with several of them.
They weren't very
I
honest.
do
Yeah, so
remember them quite well.
But I think what he's getting at is, that charity has to be person to person, or person to nonprofit, or person to church. I think that's his overarching theme, because he's trying to say, as a nation, we can't force you to be charitable by, to use the buzzwords that they like to use, redistribution of wealth, which is what socialism is, if you take it to the nth degree, which is communism.
Not even taken to the nth degree.
Yeah.
The idea of socialism is that you tax people differentially, and the government owns the means of production, so that the spoils of that production can be redistributed in a more just manner. And that is socialism. Yeah. And we turn it into this terrible, monolithic, frightening thing of communist Russia, and it doesn't have to be that. Canada is a perfectly pleasant country, full of mostly pleasant people. Mostly. But... And so socialism... But
there's all those Canadians up there.
Yeah.
Are those the non-pleasant people?
Yes. Fundamentally that's what socialism is. And Chris, my dad will always say that, most of business is done on a handshake. Mm-hmm. Like, there are, contracts that get written out, and, there's legal processes in place. But most business doesn't actually get done that way. Those are formalities in case someone makes a mistake, or someone decides to be dishonest. But most business is done with, you want to do this? Yeah, let's do this. You shake hands, and that deal is done. So I guess on that regard, absolutely, those are nominally Christian values. However, there's a broader problem with this, especially that comment when you connect government-based charity as opposed to personal charity. Mm-hmm. And that's an issue of, going back to something we talk about a lot in this show, justice. Mm-hmm. And capitalism is not a system of justice, and government handouts, or whatever you want to call them, have a lean more towards justice than individual charity. But it's starting to actually get at some of the root causes, as opposed to just handing stuff out. And so that's where I started to take issue with what Scalia is throwing around here.
I'm a little confused by the idea of traditional Christian virtues. What does that mean? Is that sort of Puritan work ethic? Is that biblical values? Because I think one of the things we see in the New Testament is there's not a lot of economics going on. There are not market economies. That is a later development. So if you talk about traditional Christian virtues informing economic policy, I think that you have to decide what that actually means, and be careful with that to separate it from what's actually going on in Scripture, because we don't have free markets in Scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't, but that doesn't... But I think Scalia's implying the reverse. Not necessarily that Christianity needs capitalism. Because I think we could have a whole show devoted to that if he said that.
Should.
And we should. But that's not... Thankfully...
Tune in week 7.
To a certain extent, thankfully, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is the reverse. That capitalism needs Christianity. More so than socialism needs Christianity. And that seems strange.
It is strange. I mean, I guess you could say, if you want to give Antonin.
There you go.
I just call him.
You can just call him Scalia.
Okay,
Scalia,
which is what most people do.
Yeah, I'm just gonna call him Scalia. I think what Scalia is getting at is, yes, business, capitalism needs certain aspects of Christianity, but so does socialism. In order for capitalism to work, you have to not only have that honesty, that Puritan work ethic, that offshoot of Judaism hammer. I don't know what else there is to that. But for socialism to work, you have to have that, blessed are the blank for the blank.
Right, and I think my concern here is if you take Christianity seriously, capitalism doesn't have a leg to stand on theologically.
Right.
And that's what's so strange, that this belief that is very much against the ideas of capitalism is somehow needed by capitalism. It is fascinating statement about the state of American Christianity.
And maybe it doesn't need Christianity, maybe it needs Christendom. That
could you explain
this
that?
idea of the political power and in some ways cultural hegemony of American capitalism and what's happened in the American church with this relationship between free market economics and the church being a dispenser of religious goods and services, and how that gets played out in the public sphere, that might be what's going on. So it's not Christianity as the faith, it's the cultural power of Christianity, which is a very different kind of thing. And we see this historically with, church being a civic institution and not just a religious one. So this is where you learn how to be a good citizen.
It's a free way to maintain social order.
Right. And how that gets wrapped up in economics. The sort of truth, justice, and the American way is capitalism and going to church on Sunday mornings. And I think that's changed drastically in the last 30 or 40 years, but I wonder if that's a little bit of where he's operating from, is that it's not the faith, it's not the theological stuff, it's the cultural influence stuff that capitalism needs.
Yeah, I think that's very much it. That it's cultural Christianity. It's the nascent, what gets wrapped up as Christian virtues in our culture is what's needed. What Scalia sees as needed versus actually people who take Christianity seriously.
Or to take it another way, and I love pushing back on this. This is fun.
I'll shove you in a locker afterwards.
You were going to do that anyway. Now I'm giving you an excuse.
True.
What if Scalia is saying this? What if Scalia is saying, because of capitalism, those who are in these positions of wealth and power now have the ability to take care of the people below?
That is, to a certain extent, what he's saying.
Yeah, and
he's saying that government charity neuters personal charity.
And he's saying that that is a more Christian thing to do than just the government coming in saying you owe 50% because we're going to give 25% to.
To a certain extent, yeah. That is certainly his claim.
Is that a good claim?
For some people, it is certainly a valid claim.
Yeah.
Some people will make the claim. And now, if they back it up, it's an argument from silence. We don't know. But they would say, because I had to pay so much in taxes to pay for these welfare programs, I'm not able to give as much to charity.
Yeah.
And that is a claim that gets made, and I can't invalidate it, right? I'm not in that position. I have no idea. I'm a poor student. I pay very little in taxes, if at all. I mean, I pay the taxes, but they come back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not my place to say whether that's a valid claim or not, but it's certainly the claim he's making is, that people would give more and charity would be stronger if there wasn't government kind of charity. But the issue is it's not really government charity. It's the only kind of justice-based structures we have. Because we think of justice as the justice system, but that's retributive justice. We're talking about kind of social justice, and the social justice institutions that we have are stuff like TANF, and which gets called welfare, and Medicare and Medicaid, and these structures that are about redistributing wealth, and thus preventing some of the causes that lead to the need to charity. It's stopping the people going into the river versus pulling people out of the river. And so it's not comparing charity to charity. It's comparing justice-based redistribution to random charitable giving, which is just not a way to survive, and it's not a way to fund an education system, for instance.
Yeah. And I think, I think everyone will agree with you that there are some things that need to be publicly funded. Education.
I don't think everyone would agree with you, but yes.
Most.
We have a very large party of people.
We do have
that drink tea that would strongly disagree.
Most people think that.
They don't actually drink tea.
They throw the tea in.
They throw the tea.
Which is...
It's a shunda.
It's really...
It's a shame.
It's a waste of...
Most people would think that there are certain things that need to be continually funded, like Medicare and Medicaid.
Certainly Medicare. Medicaid gets beat up all the time, but Medicare, sure.
Medicare, a lot, maybe fewer than most, but a lot would agree that schools should be publicly funded. Yes.
Yes.
My question to push back on you is there a difference between forced giving, like we're talking about with higher taxes going to justice programs, versus maybe charitable giving to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which promotes education and stuff? And is there a difference? Is there a dichotomy?
Well, yes, there is, and it is somewhat of a fine distinction, right? When people give charitably, they give to what's sexy at the time, right? So right after, and I don't mean to disparage this, but let's look at facts, okay? There's a huge spike in giving to hurricane relief right after a hurricane. Several years on, a lot of those places still need giving, and they're not getting it. Whereas FEMA grants are long-term. And are about long-term recovery, and are about the non-sexy things, right? So you might get a couple months where... This is the language that gets used in the aid worker world, and I know it sounds strange, but this is how we talk about it. There are causes that become the in thing, right? So right after an earthquake or a natural disaster, helping that group is the in thing. But then that peters off and people move on to the next in thing. Well, if you're a starving child whose family doesn't make enough money to feed them, you can't just periodically become the in thing and survive.
Yeah.
And education can never be an in thing because it costs billions of dollars. So, like, a lot of the work I see in public health is supported by Bill and Melinda Gates, and that's a wonderful use of his $80 billion. Like, I fully support that. And there's a lot of great justice-based work, but that can't substitute the responsibility of a people to take care of their own.
That's what I was just going to say. There's something really powerful about when we pay taxes, that it binds us in some sort of community as a nation. That there's something really powerful about that when money comes out of my paycheck, that it supports public education. When money comes out of my paycheck, that it helps feed hungry people that I don't know. And I think that there's something powerful about that, doing that as a taxes as a civic duty. That is important. I agree with you, and I also think what you were saying, Trey, I also think there are just some structural things that are so big that the most efficient way to make it happen, and not that the government is always efficient, I get that, but there are certain things that, like education and FEMA, that larger scale programs can address bigger, wider needs than individuals can.
You just twigged a memory of my
Oh, good.
my life in undergrad studying political philosophy. That's Michael Walzer's argument in a book that's sitting over on my shelf called Spheres of Justice. And I recommend that Antonin Scalia read Spheres of Justice because basically it talks about that there are some things that are too big for charity.
That says the hidden magic of Walt Disney World, but go ahead.
The book on my desk is The Hidden Magic of Walt Disney World. On the shelf over there behind you is Spheres of Justice.
Okay.
Next to... Anyways. But basically what it says is charitable giving is highly inefficient. Mm-hmm. You know, the U.S. spends more money in charity than any other nation and gets fewer results out of it. What's efficient is you pay into one big system, and then that one big system can make efficient purchases and efficient spending decisions. And unfortunately, in a modern world, that one big system is the government. A long, long time ago, that one big system was the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And we can do things to make these things function better, but fundamentally the efficient way to do justice and the efficient way to do charity is to have a single buyer.
Yep.
Rather than just millions of random people.
I also wonder if we like charity because it makes us feel warm and fuzzy,
Yeah.
and paying our taxes doesn't make us feel
That's
warm
an
and fuzzy.
obligation. That's not a
And
gift.
so, and I wonder if some of this is, it doesn't feel as good, but I almost wonder if there's something really theologically powerful about that. About when we give through taxes, that it's sacrificial and it's not fun, and it doesn't make us feel like we are awesome human beings.
Well, no, because it's really easy to give $20, right? Really easy. I have that in my I have $20. That costs. You need $20. Here's $20. That didn't feel so. That feels good. But when I watch like 15, 30%, whatever it is of my income walk out the door, that's giving till it hurts.
Yep.
Yeah.
In a very visceral way. Like, I'm about to launch my stewardship campaign, and it's going to be difficult to get 10% out of anybody. Because that, you know, when it's your decision, you want to hold on to it. But the passage from Luke in the lectionary this week is like, look, give it all away. Let it all go.
Yep.
Give it up to God. That's Luke 14:25 through 33. And we just quoted scripture. Boom.
Yes.
Well, and another thing is when you give charitably, you get an instant
Yeah.
reaction. You know where you're going. If you give to the Red Cross for, you know, disaster relief, you know that your money is going towards disaster relief.
That's not actually how the Red Cross works, but keep going.
How about when you give to UMCOR?
When you give to UMCOR, because of the apportionment system of the United Methodist Church, you know that your donation is going to disaster
going to where it
relief.
needs to go.
It's going where it needs to go. But with taxes, you know, there is a... But there's... Sorry, one of our chatters is chatting. But with taxes, there's no instant gratification. There's no, I know where this is going. You're giving to this big pile of money, we assume, that it's stored in a bag with a dollar sign. Or maybe it could be in a big vault in only coins. And every once in a while, Secretary of Treasury jumps in, a la DuckTales.
Yeah, no, I always...
That's what I'm hoping, at least.
I often have that image of...
Does that make Scalia Scrooge McDuck?
That makes him Scrooge McDuck's lawyer.